Let's understand the difference between asylum and refugee status. Can you simplify that for us?
Sure. So the first important thing to note, I think, is the definition of a refugee. So a refugee is somebody who is outside of their country of nationality, who's either been persecuted in the past or who has a well-founded fear of future persecution on account of their race, their religion, their nationality, their membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. And so that's the international law definition of a refugee. If a person meets that definition after having arrived in the United States and wants to apply for protection, then we call it asylum. So asylum is the process of proving that you meet the definition of a refugee after you've already arrived in the US.
Okay. One question that we received dealt with the nationality of the refugee or asylum seekers as well. Are there countries whose citizens are not allowed to apply for asylum or refugee status?
Great question. I think the first important thing is to kind of break it down whether we're talking about people who are already here or people who are seeking to come, right? So people who are already inside the United States and are applying for asylum, there is no nationality distinction that would prevent a particular national from pursuing asylum inside the United States. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll be granted, of course, but there are no nationality restrictions on who can pursue asylum from within the United States. Now, if we are talking about people who are looking to come to the United States as refugees, then yes, the Trump administration had announced early on in its presidency that there would be a travel ban, or some styled as a Muslim ban, of individuals from certain countries. And so now in its third iteration, that ban is still in effect, and that is having an effect on individuals who would like to pursue refugee protection here in the United States. So for your viewers, the nationalities covered by the travel ban are Iran, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, and then North Korea and Venezuela were added as a part of that travel ban as well. So asylum seekers come in a variety of different ways. One way could be an asylum seeker could come to the United States with some other permission to travel. So perhaps they come as a student, for example, and while they're studying, a conflict breaks out in their country that makes it so it's no longer safe for them to return. They could pursue asylum here in the United States thereafter. So a person could enter with a visa and then seek asylum thereafter. It's also possible that a person wasn't able to obtain a visa, particularly if the conflict that was creating the refugee situation existed before they came to the United States, as often is the case. Not only U.S. authorities, but international authorities recognize that the nature of a refugee crisis is such that people can't oftentimes apply for visas or have the time or the documentation to do so before fleeing. And so there's a well-established international rule and recognition that people, even who enter a country unlawfully, should be able to pursue asylum after they get here. So people who enter the United States without a visa can also pursue asylum.
Do you know how many asylum seekers are currently in the United States? Do you have that number?
You know, I don't have that figure. There are many thousands of individuals seeking asylum right now. In fact, I know the asylum backlogs are quite lengthy at this time. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of people waiting in line for an asylum interview. For example, I have cases now of individuals who've been waiting for an asylum interview here in Omaha for nearly 4 years, just waiting for their initial interview. And then once they have that interview, it could be another year or so before a decision is actually issued. Hopefully not, but it's possible. And then if the person is denied and pursues further relief, it could be even many more years after that through the various appeals.
Just one clarification there. Who makes the decision? Who interviews you? Or me?
Yeah. So if it's what I called an affirmative claim, it would be an asylum officer that works within the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, USCIS. It's a sub-agency within the Department of Homeland Security, and so they issue some decisions. Immigration judges can issue decisions, and like I said, the Board of Immigration Appeals can issue decisions, and in fact, the U.S. Courts of Appeals can issue decisions as well. So lots of different decision makers.
All right. What difference does it make if a person has legal representation versus if they apply on their own?
Yeah, that makes an enormous difference. So a number of studies have shown that the single most important factor in whether a person is granted asylum is whether they have access to counsel. One study, in fact, showed that a person was 5 times more likely to prevail in their asylum claim if they had an attorney helping them prepare that claim than if they did it on their own. And part of that is because the law is such a complex area. Immigration law generally has been, it's frequently said that immigration law is second only to tax law in its level of complexity. It's a very complex area of law. But it also, asylum claims in particular, require an enormous amount of evidence and proof if you can get it.
Do I choose the attorney, or the court will assign an attorney, immigration attorney for me?
Yeah, so it's up to the individual pursuing relief to select and hire and obtain their own legal counsel. People oftentimes don't realize that in immigration court, if a person is too poor to afford an attorney, one will not be appointed for them. And that's true even for very small children. Individuals who are in deportation proceedings, in removal proceedings, have to find their own attorney. And if they can't afford one, the resources of organizations like my own, the Immigrant Legal Center, are available to try to represent as many people as we can or get people plugged in with pro bono representation. But the sad reality is that our capacity is limited. We can't represent everyone who needs our assistance. And so many people go through their removal proceedings without counsel, without any attorney at all.
If I'm told no, you can't stay in the United States, what happens to me?
Yeah, so at that point it depends on a number of different factors, but if a person has entered the United States and filed what we call affirmatively before one part of the government, if that claim is denied, it gets sent over to an immigration judge where deportation proceedings begin. At that point, the person can renew their asylum claim defensively, we say, before the immigration judge. If it's denied at that point, there's an appeal up to the Board of Immigration Appeals that they can take. If it's denied there, there's yet another appeal to the U.S. Courts of Appeals, but the chances of success at each one of those levels become smaller and smaller as they go up.
I'm lucky, I got the status, I'm here in the United States. Can I get medical care and free services?
So good question, and I'll make a distinction between people who are seeking asylum and who've been granted asylum. So people who've been granted asylum or refugee protection do have the ability to qualify for some medical assistance because that's a special kind of status that enables them to qualify for certain public benefits. And so that is an option for them. People who are seeking asylum, however, if they're undocumented, they don't otherwise have a form of status that would make them eligible to obtain Medicare, for example, Medicaid, would not be able to qualify for those things. So the general rule is that unless you have a form of status that qualifies, you are not eligible to get one of those public benefits.
Okay. Now we have this growing number of asylum seekers and a slower process, or almost not granting the asylum status.
Yeah.
Why do we have this conflict? Is this a recent trend, or it has been part of the immigration history here in the United States?
Yeah, so it's both a recent trend as well as a longstanding problem. And so I'll go back. Under the previous administration, under President Obama, there were a number of decisions that were issued by the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is the highest appellate body in the United States deciding immigration cases within the immigration system. There were several precedent decisions that were issued making it very difficult for people fleeing gang violence, for example, from Central America to qualify for asylum. By no means did it make it impossible for anyone fleeing gang violence to qualify, but it made many of those cases much more difficult to win. There's a lot of ideas and discussion surrounding why that is, but the basic reality is that many Central Americans fleeing very high levels of violence, particularly in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, are fleeing violence inflicted by very, very powerful transnational criminal organizations or gangs. So they have, in my view, valid claims, but the law is operating both under the previous administration and especially under the current administration in a way that prevents many of them from qualifying for asylum.